64% of the people who live in Los Angeles are renters. If we're going to get the animals out of this shelter and into homes, a lot of them have to go into an apartment. And that raises a lot of issues for both tenants and landlords. Landlords are concerned about the impact on the apartment and the damages and the costs there. Tenants, on the other hand, want to make sure that they don't get evicted. We want to try and hopefully provide some education to landlords that having tenants with pets are probably the best tenants you're going to get. There was a landlord in North Hollywood who would only rent to tenants who have pets. And her theory is that if you have a tenant who has a pet, they're going to be having a good heart, and thus they're going to be a good tenant. On the other hand, for tenants, we want to make sure that pets don't become eviction tools and that there's certain rights they have. One of the largest reasons for people surrendering animals into this shelter is because of fear of eviction or the landlord has threatened them. Well, in many of those cases, tenants have some rights, and so we want to put forth that information to both tenants and landlords, and hopefully we can get cooperation on both parts of landlords and tenants, and we can make the lives of these animals in the shelter a lot better and save a lot of those lives.
Basically, rent stabilization is very concise, and one thing it does says is that the tenant cannot be evicted if they've been allowed to have a pet. So they can't have a pet, and then all of a sudden be told, no, you cannot have it. And basically, also, we have these workshops going on all year long. For the past 3 years, we've been hosting workshops of all different topics. This is the last one of the year, and we wanted to do something really, really different. So this time, we're not talking so much about the laws per se, about eviction and all that. We're talking about animals, so that's really exciting for us, and we really want to pass that on to everyone. And I love animals. I've always had animals, and so it's a responsibility, and it's really have to take care of them. And that's what we're going to be talking about today.
One is the East Valley Shelter. We have the West Valley Shelter and Chatsworth, the South Valley Shelter, Chesterfield Square in South Los Angeles, the North Center Shelter on Lacey Street, and the West Valley Shelter in West Los Angeles. So during the economic downturn, when so many families were losing housing or downsizing, which unfortunately included leaving the pets at the shelter or giving up their companion, it was said that this was the most difficult sacrifice any family could make. It was demonstrated that children, they were able to accept a lot of changes if they had the security of their dependable companion animal at home. So what are the benefits to animals to humans? There are so many that I cannot even address all of them here in this short presentation. So a few of them. They provide companionship to elderly adults who otherwise have no social interactions. They provide emotional support and unconditional love. They lower blood pressure and decrease stress. And children exposed to pets are less likely to develop allergies. And if children are raised with animals, they tend to develop a strong immune system. They also help improve social skills. People with pets will talk easier to other people than without pets. Heart attack patients with pets tend to have a better recovery rate. And dogs can also be your personal trainer. So walking your dog increases losing your weight or maintaining your weight. And they also provide a sense of purpose for the elderly who can not care for themselves. They have somebody to care for them. And also offer exercise for them. So instead of being at home in the house, they go out and be more social and walk their animals. They also boost the overall mood and bring feelings of joy and happiness. Who else can do that? When you get home, you have a pet that greets you. It's great. So much joy. And the children learn responsibility and compassion. They also have benefits for landlords. Tenants in pet-friendly housing, they stay on an average of 46 months longer than compared to 18 months. The vacancy rate is lower. The renters are willing to pay a premium to cover any extra costs associated. And increased demand due to a shortage of pet-friendly rentals. Responsible pet owners make more responsible tenants because they're less likely to do anything that could possibly jeopardize their tenancy. And you also have the extra income associated with pet fees. And non-refundable deposit can be used to offset the costs for cleaning when the tenant moves. Landlord get more responses by advertising that they have a pet-friendly housing. Pet owners usually spend more time at home and contribute to increased security in the area. Pets with good manners and grooming usually have responsible owners who care about their surroundings and the environment. The size of the pet is not an indicator of the pet's behavior. So large dogs can be the biggest couch potatoes and the smaller dogs can be high energy or vice versa. And there's no such thing as a dangerous dog breed. Breed is not a predictor of any individual dog behavior, but prevents good tenants from being in your community. So dogs need to be treated as individuals. They all have their unique personalities, just like we humans do. So you can set clear standards of care to avoid misunderstandings with pet-owning tenants. 63% of pet owners have more than one pet. And you, as a landlord, you can set the policies that treat pets as part of the families, because that's how your tenants see them. They're part of the family. They're not just a pet, it's part of the family. And you can set standards to encourage responsible pet ownership, such as spaying and neutering, updated vaccinations, and licensing of the pet. So what can you do to get your pet accepted by a landlord? You can get a resume for your animal. That means you indicate it's spayed and neutered, it's current under vaccinations, has a microchip, has a current City of Los Angeles licensing, take a photograph of your pet, and also a description of the animal, such as the breed, the color, the gender, if it's spayed or neutered, and also any specific markings the animal might have. So based on the application, now you should time to meet and interview not only the family, but also their pet, their companions. Observe the dog to see if it's friendly and polite. Chances are that the tenant might be a little bit nervous because they want to get your okay to make sure they can move into their new home. There's a lot of pocket pets out there. Families have might be hamsters, bunnies, reptiles or geckos. So that completely depends on what kind of rental you have. So it's either multi-dwelling or a single unit. Some of the reptile species need an outside environment, so they're not really good tenants for apartments. Some birds, depending on the species, could be a noise level issue for other tenants. And some species require special permits to keep. The Fair Housing Act is a federal law that prevents discrimination against tenants in their homes. So under the Federal Housing Act, disability is defined as a physical or mental impairment which significantly limits a person's major life activities. So even if the lease says pets or no pets or restricted pets, landlords are required to make what is called reasonable accommodations for the tenants and allow pets who serve as assistants or emotional needs animals. Service animals. Service animals are categorized as animals trained to do a specific task for their owner. The most common is a guide dog. Service animals are allowed in public places and are either a dog or a miniature horse that has been fully trained in a graded facility and have special protection laws. Assistants are emotional need animals. They can be any type of animal. Doesn't need to be individually trained or certified to perform a specific task. The emotional and or physical benefits from the animal living in the home is what qualifies the animal to be called an assistance or emotional needs animal. These animals that work, they assist and perform tasks and services for the benefit of the person with a disability or provide emotional support that improves the symptoms of disability. So a letter from a medical doctor, a therapist, is all that's needed to classify that animal as an emotional needs support animal. For example, animals can detect the disorder and alerts the owner to get prepared for an oncoming seizure, or alleviates a person's depression or anxiety, can reduces the person's pain that's stress induced. And you can also have birds that are specially trained for the hearing impaired, so they will notify an owner if there's somebody at the door or the phone is ringing. So the Federal Housing Act does include a few restrictions where this act does not apply. You should check with the Federal Housing Act website to get further information on that. So the most of that is basically landlords, they cannot charge any extra rent or pet deposits or any other fee due to pet ownership. These animals are not considered pets, and so the landlord can only charge a security deposit. So for example, if you're a dog owner and you take your dog outside of your property, you have to make sure it's on a leash, not to exceed 6 feet in length, and be in control of a competent person, and make sure that you pick up your defecation after your doggy leaves on the sidewalk. All dogs over the age of 4 months need to have a current City of Los Angeles licensing. And if the animal is not spayed and neutered, you also need to obtain a breeder's permit. And we also have noise nuisance laws in the City of Los Angeles, aggressive dog laws, dog and cats limits, and distance requirements. You're welcome to speak to myself or Officer Damasio after the presentation. We'll give you more information about that.
The Housing Rights Center is the nation's largest nonprofit civil rights organization dedicated to securing and promoting fair housing. We were funded in 1968, the same year that Congress passed the Fair Housing Act. Okay. Over the past 10 years, the Housing Rights Center has assisted over 250,000 residents. We cover the Los Angeles and Ventura counties. Okay. So we service a broad area. We have staff members who are multilingual, and if you don't see a language that is not listed there, don't be discouraged. Give us a call, and we will use Language Line to assist you. The Housing Rights Center offers free landlord-tenant counseling. So this is where if you're a landlord or a tenant, you have any questions in regards to rent increases, evictions, repairs, etc., give us a call, okay? We'll be able to provide information pertaining to the civil codes, provide sample letters, etc. Also, if you have any questions in regards to fair housing, they will also be able to assist you. You have the Outreach and Public Education Department, which is my department. We're the ones who come out to the communities and we educate residents, landlords, tenants, community organizations about fair housing and landlord-tenant rights and responsibilities. Okay. We also offer free monthly rental listing. Okay, this can be downloaded from the website. You're more than welcome to walk into one of our offices, and the offices are listed at the bottom of the green flyer. Okay, download it from the website, give us a call, email us. We will be more than happy to send it to you. Okay, and it's updated every month. We also have a fair housing enforcement department, and those two departments include discrimination, complaint, and investigation. So when someone alleges discrimination, or when someone wants to request a reasonable accommodation or modification, they go through the process, they speak to a counselor, and then that complaint is pushed to the investigations department. Okay? They will reassess the housing situation and see whether there's allegation or not, whether it's a state or it doesn't, or whether the accommodation or modification is reasonable to be requested. And we also have the litigation and advocacy department. We currently have 3 attorneys on staff who litigate on behalf of tenants when appropriate. We're not a litigious agency. We're here to advocate for fair housing and for tenants' rights as well. The fair housing laws apply to housing transactions. The most common one is obviously for those who are renting, but it also includes anyone who is in the process of buying a home, purchasing a home, or any prospective home seekers. The fair housing laws also apply to residential dwellings, which include, the most common apartments. Okay, anyone living in an apartment, condominiums, mobile home parks, and even vacant lots that will be developed in the future into residential dwellings. Any questions? No? Let's go briefly into fair housing. So under federal law, the FHA, it makes it illegal for a housing provider. And when I mean a housing provider, I'm referring to the landlord, to the manager, or anyone else who oversees the housing transaction. It makes it unlawful for them to treat a tenant different, to refuse to rent to them, to apply different terms of treatment, based on the rental agreement, based on their race, which is still happening. We still see racial discrimination. Now it's in a more subtle way. Okay? Color, sex, national origin, familial status, and disability. That includes mental and physical, and we will go further into reasonable accommodations and modifications. Okay? Every state has different fair housing laws. So California, aside from protecting you based on the federal law, they offer protections such as protection based on your income source, so where your money is coming from, okay? Or your sexual orientation or your marital status, whether you're single, divorced, widowed, etc. Common accommodations. So these accommodations are changes to the policy in the rental agreement or the rules. Okay. These common accommodations include changing the rent due date, okay, for a tenant who has a disability, assigning a parking space, transferring units. Let's say you're a tenant with a disability. During your tenancy, it's very difficult for you to come up and down the stairs. So you're living on the second level unit. You may request to be transferred to a ground level unit. There's a process, okay? And obviously one of the most common forms of reasonable accommodations include having a service or companion animal or therapeutical animals. If the disability accommodation, I didn't clarify, modifications or structural changes to the unit, adding a ramp, adding a grab bar, etc. Disability accommodation and modifications must be necessary and reasonable. By necessary, I mean they must free the tenant from any, burden or allow them to live in the unit happy without having the fear that the landlord or housing provider may terminate their tenancy. Okay, give them equal enjoyment of the premises, and it must be reasonable, meaning that it should not present an undue financial burden to the landlord or the manager. And it should not fundamentally alter the business practice. Okay? By fundamentally alter the business practice, I mean, if I'm the manager and you guys are tenants and you're requesting that we meet at 3 p.m. every Wednesday so that I can help you carry groceries up to your unit, that would be altering your business practice. I'm a housing provider, not a care provider. Okay? Does that make sense? Yeah.
Totally.
So if it's necessary and reasonable, it must be granted. Otherwise, there's potential. If the landlord or housing provider may be raising a red flag, and you may have a fair housing agency go after you to further investigate. Did you know that it is illegal for a landlord to deny a tenant with a disability the right to live with their service or companion animals? Yes? No? We learned it previously, but we're here to reinforce it. A no pet policy is legal. Housing providers do have the right to establish a no pet policy. Now, enforcing a no pet policy for a service or companion animal is illegal. So let's cover what is the difference between a pet and a service or companion animal. A pet is for recreational uses, okay? So they're here to offer, in a way, it's like a friend, a part of the family. It is permissible for the housing provider to request or ask for the tenant to provide a pet deposit or pay a pet deposit. Okay. It is permissible for a housing provider to say, we don't want pets. Okay. And they may establish breed restrictions depending. A lot of times this comes around with insurance. Okay. So this is why they may establish a size or the height or the type of breed. Okay, that's obviously under housing. Service companion animals are medically prescribed. Okay, so you need a prescription. A pet deposit is illegal. A dog is a dog. However, under fair housing, a pet is not the same as a service or a companion animal. Okay, any question?
I do. I'm deaf. I have a cocoa. I'm deaf on one side. I have a service animal, and I often get harassed, literally harassed, when I bring him because people think I'm hearing when I'm not. Do you have to carry like a note saying I'm deaf and from your surgeon or something, or is it enough that because I constantly get this?
Right. Let me finish this slide and I will address your question.
Thanks.
Okay? And that's a good question. Thanks for asking. No pet policy is illegal. Once again, these animals are not pets. They're service or companion animals. And breed restrictions are illegal. When we talk about breeds, you can include anywhere from dogs, cats, birds, a fish. A fish is a pet, okay? And they may offer some type of companionship. So this is where we come from. A tenant must be prepared to show proof that a service or companion animal is medically necessary. A letter from a doctor or therapist is the best form of proof. Okay? And the housing provider does not have to accept the request at its face, but they do have the right, they do have the right to request medical documentation. So sometimes it's not visible, right? Someone with depression may not be, that may not be a visible form of disability. So this is why the landlord would say, okay, well, provide me with something from your doctor or from your psychologist or your therapist. And this is where, fair housing laws kick
But
in.
is it just to say, okay, this person is deaf, and some people that are deaf do not have, for argument's sake, do not have service animals, and there are some people that are deaf that feel a need for them or that it helps. So just proving that you're deaf or proving that you're blind or psychotic or,
Right.
or whatever.
Give something in writing
Yeah, okay.
to your housing provider. Now, I wouldn't understand why they're harassing you if do they have a no pet policy?
Actually, no,
Okay.
it was a more general, I have a house, so I don't have
Okay,
that
so
problem,
we're-
but it was a more general question because
For-
I advocate not,
Right. So
for it.
remember, if they have a no pet policy, this is where tenants with disabilities have that protection. Now, if there's a pet policy, pets are welcome. There shouldn't be any type of harassment for other tenants. Okay?
But the person that's disabled should have a note from a
note.
doctor should suffice
Right.
and is necessary
There
to
should be-
go
Right,
forward.
there has to be a nexus. This is the reason why I need a service or companion animal tied to this disability, right?
Right, okay.
Last question before I proceed, yes, ma'am?
Oh, that was just to put a finer point on it. If it's illegal to deny somebody with a disability to have a service animal, is the proof of that animal being a quote-unquote service animal beholden on the person with the disability?
Good question.
I'm not understanding your
If
question.
I'm a landlord
Okay.
and I know that my tenant has a disability, the disability itself is proven under the law.
Right.
They have a dog, they
Right.
say this is my service dog,
Right.
but they cannot prove the dog is a service dog. Is there an issue?
Prove in terms of what? Provide
I don't know,
documentation?
that's my question, is how do you?
Okay, when we talk, let me just clarify, when we're talking about ADA,
Yeah.
and I believe Lieutenant Susan covered it, they have to wear a vest and it's only a dog or a miniature pony. Okay, under fair housing, they do not have to wear a vest. They do not have to be a specific breed. It could be a fish. How are you going to put a little vest on a fish? Okay, they just have to provide a nexus and connection. This tenant has a disability. This is what allowing them or granting this reasonable accommodation will alleviate, or remove the burden of and allowing them to enjoy the premises. Okay.
I can also say that the
Thank
ADA does not demand any kind of proof.
Okay. Prohibited practices under fair housing. So charging a pet deposit or fee or other surcharges are illegal. Okay, remember these are not pets, these are service or companion animals. However, if the animal itself damages the unit, the housing provider does have the right to, deduct that from the security deposit. Okay? Prohibiting a service or companion animal to be in common areas. Okay, that's illegal. Requiring that a service or companion animal wear a vest or special clothing. Remember, I differentiated the difference between ADA and fair housing. Fair housing does not enforce that these service or companion animals wear a vest. Okay? A little bit more lenient and more inclusive. Another prohibited practice would be requiring that a service or companion animal complete a special training or certification program. Okay? They're not required. So once again, the difference between ADA and fair housing. If you were denied the right to live with your companion or service animal, please visit us, call us. You're more than welcome to send us an email. If you have the handout, all this information is displayed. You can send us an email at info@housingrightscenter.org. Visit our website or visit our social media. We constantly post information about service animals, companion animals, or anything else related to fair housing and landlord-tenant rights and responsibilities. Does anybody have any other questions? No? Basically concludes my part of the presentation. I don't know if you guys have anything else. Oh, yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay, so my understanding is a landlord can establish whatever rules they want before someone moves in with
Right.
a pet.
Correct.
But once they have a pet, what are the rules regarding threatening to evict them or evicting them for something that a pet does?
Are we talking about a pet or a service or companion
A
animal?
pet.
A pet. So remember, a pet is not it's not protected under federal fair housing. So if the pet, okay, is creating a nuisance or presenting a nuisance, first of all, you have to outline it in your rental agreement. It's very important that you have detailed description. Okay, if your pet is being too noisy, we're going to give you a 3-day notice to comply with it. Or if they're damaging the premises, it depends on your rental agreement. This is why I'm giving somewhat of a vague answer because we have to go back to the rental agreement. That's your contract between you and the tenant. If the tenant signs it, then you can hold them accountable for that.
If there's nothing in
Right.
the lease agreement
Right.
about pets, somebody, I'm a volunteer at the West Valley Shelter,
Right.
and people come in there all the time and they say, I have to turn my dog in because my landlord is making me do it.
Right.
Now, they already have the dog, they're already living there. Are there rules for what a landlord can do if there's nothing in the lease
Okay.
and they already have
That
a
may
pet?
become a legal issue, so I recommend that you refer them to consult legal aid, because now we're talking about a legal doc, you know?
Yeah, so actually it depends on the unit. So if it's a rent-controlled unit, there's certain rights and responsibilities. If it's non-rent control, basically you can evict without any reason whatsoever, just a legal notice. Under rent control, and even, so it depends on whether there's a rental agreement that specifically says no pets, and the tenant brought in the pet without awareness of the landlord. Then they could be possibly subject to eviction. But if there's nothing in the rental agreement, the tenant has established that there is a pet there, the landlord's accepted rent. Under the rent control ordinance, you cannot change the terms of tenancy. And so in most cases, and each case is different, so I can't give you a general, we have to look at each case on a case-by-case basis, but in most cases, that tenant would be protected against eviction for having that animal there.
If the animal is making noise or causing trouble, does that I assume would change the situation?
That would change the circumstances, yes. Just like creating a nuisance, using the property for illegal purposes, or things like that, threatening other tenants would be a basis for eviction.
A follow-up on that. So if you have an agreement, though, for a year, and you can have ABC pet, they can't break that agreement, that contract, in the middle of the lease agreement?
That's correct. Well, once the
Unless
pet is in there, and everyone knows you cannot unless there's some other violation under just cause eviction prevention provisions. If it's a non-rent controlled apartment and you have a lease that says that you're protected under the lease.
And one on other things. So let's say you move in, the landlord takes the money, et cetera, and it's not rent controlled, and the landlord decides after 2 years, doesn't even say the dog is a nuisance, just says, okay, now I don't want the dog. And you have a lease not specifying either way. What happens then?
The housing provider has a right to change the term of tenancy, change the terms with a 30-day notice.
Even with the lease?
If it's a month-to-month tenancy, no lease.
No, with the lease.
Okay, with the lease, no. You're locked into those terms. Once your lease expires, okay, you transition into a month-to-month tenancy unless you re-sign a new lease. Then they have the right to come in with a 30-day notice and request that, let's say, change the policies to a no pet policy. However, you may request a reasonable accommodation because your dog is not a pet, it's a service or companion.
No, forget the service. But the question is if there is nothing in the lease, you have a year lease, you've had a dog for 6 months at the lease, you have no provisions either way, can they then, can they start eviction notices or ask you to have your dog leave, even though for 6 months? you know what I'm saying.
But once again, I'm not an attorney for that. We do
Yeah.
recommend they consult legal aid because that would be a breach of contract. Because for 6 months they didn't say anything, so we get into, some type of, yeah.
And there's a tenant rights clinic, I would advise you, and I have information in the back where you can sit down on one-to-one with an attorney and go over your particular situation. So
And
rather
that's
than-
available to everyone.
Yes,
Tenants'
yeah.
rights, thank you.
Yes, sir. Another question?
If there's a multi-unit property, and I'm talking about pets as opposed to service animals.
Right.
Are they allowed to restrict some tenants or like either prohibit pets or put restrictions on pets if other tenants are allowed to have them? Like for example, if one person in one of the apartments has a pit bull, can they tell another one they can't have a pit bull?
And this is in regards to pets?
What's that?
In regards
In
to
regards to
pets?
pets.
They will, remember, we care about fair housing and must be equally employed. We may be talking, maybe they're allowing that person, it has to be equally employed. That's the answer.
So it has to be consistent. among all the
Consistent throughout, yeah, correct. Because then anyone else can allege protected class, discrimination based on another protected class, right? Now, when we're talking about someone with disabilities, there's a gray area, but if there's nothing, this is not a service or companion animal, then it must be equally employed to all.
So it would
Right.
have to be consistent.
Yes,
with all.
consistent. I'll go around, if you had a question.
Yeah, Larry, the statistics that you had about how people with pets are better tenants, do you have a brochure on that that can be handed out at the shelters, so that people can give those to their landlord? I think that would be very helpful.
That's an excellent idea. We should produce that. We do have articles on that particular landlord who stated that and has proof based on their experience. But I know there's some studies there. I don't know that.
Yeah, we've been working on a brochure for that, so it'll be coming out soon.
So we got in a veteran who was disabled with anxiety. He had rescued 2 kittens in the Koreatown area. He brought them in. That particular landlord was looking for any excuse to clear out the Section 8 tenants there. He was served with a threat and an eviction notice. We put him in touch with Housing Rights Center. Housing Rights Center responded, gave the landlord all the information. He got a letter from his doctor, and that landlord backed off.
On your way out, there'll be a box for each of you with a cat in it. And as you may know, we got a very generous grant, and so we are able to offer cat adoptions for free for kittens over 4 months old. And we also have some amazing, amazing dogs. So we love it when people come here to visit because you get an opportunity to see the just wonderful, wonderful animals that are available in the shelter. I also want to mention rabbits. We have a lot of rabbits. So look around while you're here, visit, let the staff and volunteers introduce you. We do have a 30-second rule. If you stand and look at one animal for more than 30 seconds, we know you'll be in love. You'll want to take that one home. So that's a guarantee. So thank you for coming. I hope this workshop helps everyone. Yes.